Hi everyone, this is Kavita, Certified Empowerment Coach and Hypnotherapist, and you are listening to the Enlightened Heart podcast, where we explore topics that empower HSPs and empaths to go from surviving to thriving in the world. I use my years of coaching, my personal experience, and my training to provide deep insights and implementable strategies to help you thrive. Hi everyone, today I am so excited to have Kathleen Joan here with me on the podcast. Now, Kathleen is a priestess of Brigid committed to the resurrection of the divine feminine, especially within her own Catholic Christian tradition. She holds master's degrees, and that's plural, in theology and ministry and has over 10 years ministry experience, including directing retreats, teaching classes on religion and spirituality, and leading small group spiritual communities. She offers Reiki, energy healing, spiritual direction, and new moon goddess circles and retreats to help women claim their sacredness in the image of the Divine Mother and take their place in the great rebalancing that is happening in today's world. Hi, Kathleen. So great to have you here today.
Hi, Kavita. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
So great. Okay, so let's start with the question I ask everyone. Do you consider yourself a highly sensitive person or empath?
Yeah, I do. And I would say that I didn't always know what that was, being a highly sensitive person or empath, until really I was in my 20s when someone who was actually my Reiki teacher mentioned being an HSP. And I said, "What's that?" And she explained it. And I said, "Oh, am I one of those?" And she was like, "Girl, like, yes, of course you are." I was like, "Oh, you mean there's a category for that?" Right? So I guess I hadn't known there was a label or a particular way of expressing being kind of super sensitive to others' feelings or other people's energy. I kind of just thought that was normal. Because that's the way that I am. But it started to make sense to me that maybe not everybody operates on that wavelength, right? And so anyway, I mentioned that person was my Reiki teacher because Reiki is one way that I do find myself using my skills, right, as an HSP or empath.
Yeah, so that makes you great at what you do, I'm sure as well, right? So yes, it's so funny how we assume like everybody just experiences the world the same way, right? They don't. Or I have the opposite, some people will come and say that I felt so different and alone. And so, when I found out that there was it's not like a diagnosis, but it's a temperament, and that there's almost like a reason, and I was wired this way. It's like this big weight like that's released off your shoulders, right? So, so great. I love to talk about people's stories. So tell me about yours. Well, now you're doing this great work and with energy healing. Is that what you've always done?
No, it is not.
No, yes.
Yeah. So how I got to where I am today, it's a long story. And the most important piece of it for me has been this spiritual sense of like following my path. So I did grow up Catholic, raised Roman Catholic, and I was always very engaged with that and really committed to that faith and the path of, faith and service and all this. I volunteered with nuns after college, like lived in a community of nuns for 2 years. Yeah, everybody thought I was a nun. And like I was very sort of seeking, like, how am I going to follow a spiritual path and be of service, right? I always knew that there was a deep problem, that something was deeply off within the way that my tradition did not ordain women and still does not ordain women as priests. And so there was this disconnect between how I felt called to be a spiritual leadership and yet was being told, like every Sunday when I went to Mass, like just with the visual reminder, right, of the male leadership role standing up there in the role of the priest, that like you are, there was a message, right, that you're not good enough for this, right? So something is inherently less divine about you. Something in the Christian tradition, the way I say, that's said is, well, you're less Christ-like, you're less Jesus-like, right? Because you're female, which is of course silly. But so there was this always this kind of, I guess, disconnect, right? Or way that I knew that something was off. And so in following my spiritual path, like I went and did my my master's in theology and ministry, and for 9 years, I taught religion and led retreats at a Catholic high school. But during that time, I was also discovering the divine feminine. And she is what made things make sense to me. Like, all of a sudden, it was like, wait a minute, you mean God is not, and I'd always known this, but there was a deep level of like, wait, you mean God is not an old white bearded man sitting up on a cloud somewhere? You mean like, like God is something that can be within us, right? And within me as a female, right? Within anyone who is not old or white or male or powerful, right? Like a king or lord or master, like these images that we get of the divine from patriarchal traditions that are so problematic. And so, yeah, for me, discovering the divine as mother, discovering the goddess really allowed me to say, oh, wait, well, if God can be she, then she can be within me. And I'm not separated from the divine by my gender, right? So I would say that was a growth that happened slowly over time. But now, it's kind of come to the point where my mission is to help other people discover that, right? Discover the divine feminine, however they relate to her. And really, no matter your gender identity, we all have that feminine aspect that has been really neglected in our images of God or of the divine, particularly in Western religion traditions. So my mission is to help people encounter that, encounter the divine within themselves because of that.
Yes. Yeah. I love that story of how, you didn't see that divine in yourself. And so the divine feminine helped you to see that. Right. And so for those people that don't know, how would you describe the divine feminine?
That's a great question. So I guess two answers to that. One is there are these basically just different images and names that we can use for the divine, right? And again, typically like in a patriarchal, like Western Christian tradition, people say God, the image pops up of like old white bearded man on a cloud, right? And it sometimes can be as simple as switching the names or the images to be something that we resonate more with. And all of a sudden, new things come through, new information comes through, new opportunities open up, right? Like, for example, the image of the old white bearded man on a cloud, like that guy, I don't find him super approachable, right? I don't, and a lot of people find him, and like worse, I mean, like associated with really, damaging patriarchal or colonial traditions, right? That have oppressed and damaged and harmed a lot of people. And so a lot of people want nothing to do with that. A lot of people are walking away, particularly from Christianity, right? Because that image of God is not something that's resonating anymore. So sometimes it's a matter of saying, well, maybe that's not who God is. Maybe God is more like the image that a lot of people love is like a comforting mother, right? Even within the Catholic tradition, the image of a divine mother has stayed alive actually through Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? And a lot of people pray the rosary to Mother Mary or, to La Guadalupe or to, Our Lady of Lourdes, like all these different appearances of Mary have kind of given people a way to relate to something, to a spiritual mother, right? And she seems a lot more approachable sometimes, right? If you want the divine to give you a big hug and be comforting and be nurturing, it's important to cultivate those images because that's a lot closer to who the divine or God or sacred source, actually is than sort of a powerful Lord and King who is going to punish you for doing things wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that idea of the mother, right? Our mother archetype also,
Yes.
right? In society is that mother that accepts us how we are. Right.
Yeah.
And so that energy into divine feminine, and I'm getting goosebumps. It's so amazing to hear.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I know you're a mom also, Kavita. So,
yes.
so many women, like we embody the divine feminine without even realizing it, right?
Yeah. And so then, you discover the divine feminine, and so you want to share that with the world. That's what you're doing now, right? So tell us a little bit more details about the steps, the key steps that you've taken to get to where you are today, right now.
Yeah, thanks. Gosh, I think like it's just been a series of like asking questions at every stage and sort of, I guess this is one thing that I would say goes with being highly sensitive or empathic is for me, my spiritual path has involved a lot of deep kind of interior listening. And the task of sort of listening to the guidance that's within rather than some of the messages that we're getting from outside of us is, I think I would say that's the most important piece of the process, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I can say, the way I phrase it is the goddess showed up in my life. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is, like, I happened to go with a friend to this event, or I happened to ride a bus by this church where they were talking about the divinest feminine. Like, it shows up as kind of like things that appear in your life, but those appear when you're open and when you're asking the questions and when you're kind of curious, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. And you're
one
paying
opportunity,
attention. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I would say my first real exposure to divine feminine was probably the first was like Mother Mary within my own tradition, but I didn't recognize that because within
Mm-hmm.
Catholicism, Mary's very clearly defined as not divine, right? Goes along
Mm.
more with that, like, the whole God is male and humans are not, whatever. Femaleness doesn't go with divinity, right? But when I was finishing my degree in theology and ministry, a friend invited me to go see a Hindu spiritual teacher named Amma. She's known as the Hugging Saint, and she travels
Yes.
around the
Yeah.
world. Yeah, she's like
Mm-hmm.
an enlightened guru, right? And
Mm-hmm.
her blessing, her darshan that she gives to everyone is a hug. And it was and she embodies the goddess. She like dresses up as the goddess and is like taking on that role of the loving mother who wants to hug everybody. It was so incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful experience. And I was sitting there going, wait, you can do this? Like
Yeah.
this, like a woman is going to stand up there and not only like preach about the divine, but like embody her. And
Mm-hmm.
just this, and she was totally, by the way, like you can totally tell she's on the spiritual plane, right? That most people are not on. It was just really incredible experience. But I encountered her, and then I encountered a church in San Francisco that is called Her Church. It's a Lutheran church where all of the images for the divine are female. And
Wow.
so I started attending that, and I was like, again, wait, you can do this? Like, this is a thing. And so, like, I guess I would say, like, those opportunities are things that popped up for me. And then it was really a matter of listening really hard and kind of sitting with the contradictions, right? That I was
Mm-hmm.
feeling between where I felt I was being led. Like, I remember thinking, this goddess stuff is like the most important thing I am pursuing right now at this point in my life. And yet I wasn't comfortable talking about it fully in like a lot of the rest of my life, including, and
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
very supportive professional environment at the Catholic school where I worked. It wasn't a problem per se for me to talk about, divine feminine, but there was this deep integration that needed to happen for me between, the messages I'd always gotten of like, oh, the divine is not you because the divine is not feminine. So like really taking that in, sitting with it, praying with it, like receiving Reiki for it, which is something I can talk
Mm-hmm.
about too, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's so, when I think of, my upbringing is Hindu, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a Hindu household, and at at a certain age, it started to feel really uncomfortable that there was the worshiping of the goddess, and yet females are treated as secondary in society. And I don't want to go too much into this, but how, if someone is pregnant with a female, with a woman, then that they don't want that child because a female is considered a burden. So I would sit there and think, well, that doesn't make any sense. We're
Mm-hmm.
worshiping the feminine, a mother, this, the representation of feminine energy. And then we're saying, well, because you're female, you're not good enough and you're second to the
Mm-hmm.
male. And
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of contradiction, right, that's
Yep.
happening. And so that contradiction really didn't sit well with me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it still doesn't. So I love that you're bringing this in to your
Mm-hmm.
religion. For me, it took like a stepping back, right, and
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to. Like, I really didn't feel like going to a temple. I didn't feel like being
Mm-hmm.
there because I just felt like there was not the embracing happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So you worked at a Catholic school as a teacher, right? We
Mm-hmm.
didn't talk about that.
Yes.
Some people don't know that, right? And so you started teaching. How long ago were you teaching?
Oh gosh, 9 years, and I actually just finished my final year, so I stepped away from
Hmm.
that at the end of the school year. So that was 2012 to 2021. It was a long time.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
That's amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you touched so many lives, and in that process. And so you stepped away from that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a discernment process right there, you know.
Yes. I'm sure it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh, I'm going to step away. I'm done. Okay, bye.
No.
No.
No, no,
Yes.
no. No, and that came from several factors. One is that I'm in the process of moving at the moment, but it did feel again sort of like the next step on my path, which
Mm-hmm.
for me just became super important to bring the goddess front and center. And again, had I stayed, I probably would have taught about her, right? I probably would have
Mm-hmm.
developed an elective on the divine feminine in the Catholic Christian tradition, for example, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying there weren't ways to bring her in, but what started to just come really front and center for me was like I want to be working well with adults, although I love working with kids, right?
Yes. Yes.
But working with people who intentionally want to discover the divine feminine, to deepen that through retreats, through energy healing, and to really make that the focus. And you know, at a certain point, I guess just something that you've done for a long time and was actually really good for a long time can start to feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's not appropriate anymore and you're just ready to grow to something new.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, and I imagine that, you know, as an empath or an HSP, right, there
Mm-hmm.
can be those moments where we become particularly aware of our own inner voice. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, like, I had a lot of questions about leaving that job. You know,
Yes.
I'm not going to continue in teaching, and so right now I'm in this in between space, right? As
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing my divine feminine ministry, and you know, there's questions about what's going to happen next and what's going to look like, and is the finances going to match where it was before, and all of these things. And the one thing I guess I can say is like I got to a place where the thing that once felt life giving now felt really stifling, and really felt
Mm-hmm.
like a dead end, right? And we're like a year ago it had not. And so it was really, again, kind of about just noticing and kind of, mm, in some way, one way it was courage to take a leap. In another way, it was simply self-preservation because I was going to go a little crazy. Like if I stayed with the
Mm-hmm.
thing that was now feeling like a dead end, right? So, and I'm not someone who like lets go of things lightly. So I'm Taurus with a Capricorn moon, if that tells you
Okay. Yeah.
anything. So, so I can get really grounded. I can get really settled in things, and so it sometimes Goddess has to push me by making the circumstances feel really stressful, right? Before I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to take that leap. And so yeah, it just got to the point where it was time to move on.
Yeah. And I'm sure some people listening are feeling that, right? They know
Mhm.
that where they are right now, whether it's where they live or what they're doing for work in the world, and
Mhm.
it just at one time it was where they were meant to be. And then there's a
Mhm.
certain point that you're ready for the next thing, right?
Mhm.
And so you still have a choice. You can stay there, right?
Mhm.
And you stifle it and hold it in and whatever, deal with it. And
Right.
a lot of people tend to do eventually go into numbing and different ways to
Yes.
to cope, or you can pay attention. And it sounds
Mhm.
like you have in your life, at least the last 10 years or so, paid attention, right, to what your intuitive guidance is telling you and what your body is telling you. And if you pay attention, we all get those insights. It's
Right.
just if we're listening or not. And so you listened, which takes a
Mhm.
lot of courage. So I want to acknowledge you for taking this leap, right,
Mhm.
into
Thank you.
going into it full time and moving, you mentioned, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, transition, but you know, we could all use some
Mhm.
transition after the pandemic. So
Yes, right? It's like, oh, transition. Okay. I'm a
yeah,
little bit more comfortable with that
let's do
now.
something
Yes.
different. Let's just
Yes.
change this up a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So now you do this work, the retreats and all that that you spoke about earlier.
Mhm.
What would you say to someone that is maybe sensitive or not, or an empath or not, but is in a place that they're feeling what you were feeling, what you felt, right? That they're maybe where they're at is not in alignment anymore, right? Those are the best words that I can come up
Mhm.
with.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for someone in that space?
Mm. Yeah. Not in alignment. Yeah. Gosh. I mean, I just I know how hard it is, right, to be in that space where the thing doesn't feel aligned anymore, and yet I don't know what other possibilities there are.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, often it's like a failure of imagination,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And like, like I'm in that space and I'm like, but if I leave this, I don't know how else, right? Like during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic was when I officially started as a business, my Divine Feminine ministry. I never heard of entrepreneurial ministry before,
Mm-hmm.
right? I had always just thought of ministry as something that people did within these sort of institutional structures. And in my world, it was institutional church structures, so like parishes or schools and stuff. And entrepreneurial ministry was that. Like I even had someone who's Catholic say to me like, well, is it a business or is it a ministry? Like you can't put those two things together, right? I'm like, actually, like
Oh. Mm-hmm.
it's a ministry that has to be structured as a business because the institution is not supporting this divine feminine work, right? So
Right.
anyway,
Yes.
that's a bit of a tangent, but feeling that lack of alignment, sometimes I guess for me it's been about trusting that there are more possibilities available than I'm currently aware of. Because
Okay.
like
Yes.
it's like at each point, even when I volunteered after college, right? I worked with the Sisters from Notre Dame. I did that in Lima, Peru. I was in Peru, and
Mm.
just experiencing a different culture and a different country. I just really so often would stand there and kind of be like, wow, like the universe is so much bigger, and there are so many more possibilities than I had just previously encountered. Right? It's like just the way that things operated, I would be like, huh, I never thought of that because it's not in your cultural worldview, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
or even like a goddess church, I would have never thought there would be a goddess church, right? I had never heard of, a Hindu guru who embodies a goddess and goes around hugging people. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
there are always these, like, I think that's what a lot of my path has been about kind of discovering, like, this thing that I never knew existed, but it's like exactly what I wanted or needed, right? And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know maybe that I needed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess I would suggest just kind of, and this is super hard, but like openness
Mm-hmm.
to the fact that maybe the thing you never knew you always needed is out there. You just don't know what it looks like yet, and it
Mm-hmm.
could be around the corner.
Yeah. Just trusting, right? That there
Mhm.
is something. If you're feeling this, start to
Mhm.
pay attention and see what that's about.
Mhm.
And I will say this, sometimes when I've worked with people that want to change their careers,
Mhm.
they end up not changing their careers because it was more about finding other parts of their life that were out of balance.
Mhm.
That's not what you're talking about. You felt like a stifling energy, right,
Mhm.
in what you were doing. So that's very different than I'm just tired,
Yes.
right? And so when you're
Mhm.
in that tired and like kind of burnout phase, then it's about discovering, well, intuitively, what is this about? Do I just need a
Mhm.
break? Do I need to have more fun? Do I need to have better relationships, spend more time with friends, take time off, have boundaries, all those things that we
Mhm.
do?
Mhm.
Or is it really time for me to move forward? Right. And
Right.
so and when you do choose, whatever you choose, there's no wrong, right? In that choice,
Right.
you can go and do something else. There's always a next step available. So that
Mhm.
trust, it's not easy, right?
No.
But it can be done, right?
Uh
And so
huh.
your story is inspiring to those that are in that
Mm.
place. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that resonates a lot what you're saying. I mean, I discerned for a good year, right? Like
Hmm.
whether is and it was also a pandemic. So it was like, wait,
Yes.
am I feeling the way I'm feeling because I've been locked in my house for months? Like, am I going to feel
Hmm.
better when we go back on campus? Like, and actually the returning to campus was what illustrated that for me. Like, it became a lot clearer. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, other people are feeling really excited to return to campus. Like I would talk to my colleagues and there was that
Hmm.
excitement and it wasn't there for me. And all of a
Yes.
sudden I was like, oh, like this isn't just a
Mm.
pandemic blues kind of thing, This is about
Yeah.
something really needing to be born into the world,
Hmm.
right? From inside that just needed a different structure and a different space.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
So I love that description, right? You was like, oh, my
Mhm.
colleagues want to go back. They're so excited to be back on campus. They don't want to teach online anymore.
Right, right.
And I'm not feeling that way. So you started paying
Mhm.
attention to that kind of
Yeah.
being one of the things that led to this decision, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what about the Reiki? Tell me a little bit about the Reiki and how you
Oh
use that.
yeah, yeah. Thanks. Well, I
Hmm.
know you're a Reiki master, as well, and
Yeah.
So yeah, Reiki is just this beautiful energy. It's a form of energy healing. If people are not familiar with it, it actually comes from a Japanese tradition. So the word Reiki
Mm-hmm.
means divinely guided life force energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this beautiful, gentle form of energy healing where you channel. If you're in person, the practitioner channels this energy. It doesn't come from me as the practitioner; it comes through me.
Right.
It comes through us. I'll say, right? You're also a
Yeah, yeah.
practitioner, and yeah, so it's an energy that is not from the practitioner, but it is truly, I mean, it's divine, it's divinely guided, and it's a gift of healing and sort of restoring to well being, balancing the energy that's in your system. It can promote physical healing. It can also balance your mental, emotional, spiritual, and the way
Mm-hmm.
that all intersects with the body and the energy field and all this, right? The way I describe it is like being in the arms of the goddess. Like it's this
Mm.
really feels to me like a gentle hug from life, from the universe, from the divine
Yes.
feminine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that it is a very sort of like feminine archetypal kind of energy healing because
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I, as a practitioner, I don't control how the energy is going to heal the person who's receiving, right? Like I send that energy and it works in their system as it needs to,
Mm-hmm.
and to bring healing and well-being and wholeness. So, and it's very yin sort of practice in that sense. It's a lot about receiving and being refilled and kind of restored, so that you can then go out and be your best self in the world. And I do connect it to sort of um, being an HSP or an empath, and I think my Reiki practice has really improved my intuition or my ability to pay attention to what
Yes.
I know
Mm-hmm.
as an
Mm-hmm.
empath, right? Because I don't like, there are sort of suggested ways that you can go about a Reiki session to make sure that the person gets sort of a total healing. But a lot of it is about following my intuition as a
Yeah.
practitioner and
Yes.
feeling like you
Yes.
can actually feel where the energy, you know this, right? You can actually feel where the energy is strongest, and that's where you go, and that's where you channel the energy. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a deeply sort of empathic, intuitive, feminine, receptive form of
Mm-hmm.
gentle energy bath and healing. I love it.
Yeah, what a beautiful description of Reiki, right? I think one of the
Mm,
misconceptions is that the practitioner is healing
mm,
the person, and so I love your explanation, right?
thanks.
Um, and so now, how do you work with people now? I know I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the bio, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what's the work you're doing right now and you're stepping into, right?
Yeah.
And maybe something, anything that's upcoming.
Yeah, thank you. So I do practice. All of my ministry is distant via
Yes.
Zoom or phone at this point, right? That's the wonderful thing about Reiki is it works at a distance. So yeah, it's not bound by time or space because it's divine
Mm-hmm.
and divinely guided. So it's been super cool to practice distant Reiki with clients who are on Zoom, and I'm sending them energy and they feel it wherever they are, right? So I offer Reiki in the arms of the goddess to help
Mm-hmm.
people get that sort of restore and refill with just life giving energy so that they can go out and be who they are, follow their calling in the world. And I also offer new moon goddess circles for women. So those are retreats.
Mm-hmm.
They're like an hour and a half mini retreat around the new moon. And that's actually a part of a group called the Wild Woman Project. I offer the circles through
Mm-hmm.
that group, and that's a global network of women's circles. So it's cool because we are talking about a certain theme that's related to the astrology of that moon cycle. And we know that women's circles around the world are talking about the same themes and bringing some of the same energies around the same new moon, right? So it's a cool thing to be part of. And I offer retreats as well. So I actually have a retreat coming up for the fall equinox. And
Oh,
thank you for
yay.
including some of that information. Yeah, for anyone who's interested
Yes.
on the podcast information.
Yeah. So I will have that in the show notes, right? The links
Mm-hmm.
to the Reiki healing, the goddess circle. Although
Mm-hmm.
I think that the best way to get in touch with you might be through your newsletter. But so I'd love to hear from you that. And then I will also just mention that I'll have the link for the fall equinox
Yeah, thank you.
event retreat. Yes. So
Yeah.
so if someone was like, oh wow, I really connect with Kathleen Joan and I just want to be in touch with her and resonate with it, how would they be in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is brigidsflame.org. It's all one word.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be in the podcast notes. And
Yes.
my newsletter, you can actually get on my newsletter if you download my free gift, which is on my website. I have a
Mm-hmm.
guide that I've created called 5 Ways to Connect with the Sacred Feminine Daily. And that is
Mm.
some spiritual practices that anyone can do, just from your home, and you can work these into your daily routine to cultivate a sense of connection with that divine feminine energy. So I'd love to share that with you. So you can download
Yay,
that at
yeah.
brigidsflame.org.
Yeah, what a, not more than fun, but I love that free gift, right? And so we have all those links will be available. And so I also love to ask my guests for a resource, right? Maybe a resource that helped them. So,
Mm-hmm.
of course, you are a wonderful resource, all your links, your newsletter, and then so something other than what you offer. What is something a resource? I call it the resource reveal.
Yeah, thank you. So one book that really helped sort of solidify a lot of my thinking around divine feminine was by Rihanna Eisler. It's called The Chalice and the Blade. And
Mm-hmm.
she draws on like a million different academic disciplines to talk about, including
Hmm.
archaeology,
Oh,
to
wow.
sort of
Okay.
reveal how like in sort of the prehistoric, like Neolithic, prehistoric Western, like Mediterranean and European societies were mainly goddess worshipping, and they were extremely peaceful and egalitarian societies. And
Oh,
she
wow.
compares that to kind of the energy of the chalice, right, which is the respect for the ability to give life, which is what early people saw in the earth, like earth as sort of our mother, and the
Mm-hmm.
bodies of women that were giving life similarly to the earth in her seasons and all this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
she compares that to sort of the later societies that were patriarchal, based on images of like warrior king deities, like gods who were
Yes.
like warrior gods, right? And there was this moment in history, I guess, is what she's arguing, in human history, when these prehistoric, like peaceful, agricultural, very egalitarian goddess societies were conquered by the warrior god societies, right? And that we've
Mm.
basically been in a mess of patriarchy ever since.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sounds
Yeah,
really
it's
interesting.
fascinating.
Yes.
So
Yes.
when I read that, I was like, okay, so, and many people who I sort of encounter in a lot of women's spiritual communities would say or argue that today is sort of a moment in history when the divine feminine is coming back into our consciousness.
Mhm.
So it's cool to kind of think about that arc of history and what we can do today to move back a little bit towards those societies of peace and not having big, social differences in wealth and class. And it's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
dominating power of the blade; it's the life-giving power of the chalice. Right. So
Mm.
anyway, high recommend.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, that sounds amazing. Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah,
recommendation. Yeah.
sure.
So it's so great to have you on this podcast. And I thank you for being so honest and sharing all that you did.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Kavita. This has been great.
Great. So thanks, everyone. Until next time, take good care. Bye. Thank you for joining us for the Enlightened Heart podcast. Remember, I will have all the resources that I mentioned available at theenlightenedheart.pro. I'm your host, Kavita, and if you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to follow us. Take good care. Until next time, bye.